Father will reap your enemies. Isn't that a classic? And today I'm gonna tell you how to build her best. My name is Juice, and let's get into it. So what artifacts does this intimidating diplomat desire? None other than 4-piece Harmonic Whimsy. This set is tailor-made for her, as it perfectly tends to your Bond of Life-based mechanics. You'll yield the highest Arla damage numbers when having her equipped with this set. The 2 pieces attack percent is a very welcome boost to her stats, and the 4 pieces complete synergy with her playstyle, easily her best artifact choice. However, 4-piece Gladiators is a very competitive close second. You see, if you have a Gladiators and Harmonic set that are of similar quality, Harmonic wins. Always. But since Gladiators is a set that you farm over time from leveling your characters, you'll end up with crazy pieces over time that are seriously hard to replace, making it resin and efficient to farm an entirely new set for her. The older of a player that you are, the more true that this becomes. Of course, Harmonic will be better if you're willing to go through the effort of getting artifacts which are of similar quality to your Glad pieces. Just keep in mind that you can evade the effort entirely through using Glad. If you're a newer player that hasn't farmed it much over time, this will apply to you much less. The newer your account is, the more and more I recommend farming Harmonic Whimsy, because you won't have farmed such insane pieces over time. Harmonic is an upgrade, yes, but evaluate whether it's worth a resin investment or not when you can just use Gladiators. 2-piece mix and match sets include 2-piece Pyro percent, attack percent, EM, and normal percent. As for Arlecchino's main stats, simple. Go for attack percent or EM, Pyro percent, and crit percent. You use EM in Vapor Forward Melt, and attack percent in any other Arla team where you're not vaping or consistently melting. Bennett will cover for your attack stat in such teams, because having a balance of high EM and high attack percent in Vapor Forward Melt is such a big deal. Otherwise, attack percent will serve you very well. From there, it's a pretty standard damage percent goblet plus crit percent circlet setup that you want to use. As for substats priority, simple, go for this. ER percent isn't present here because you generally only want to use Arla's Burst when you're about to die. The self-heal is the burst's value. If you don't need the self-heal, then don't use it, because you'll lose out on damage from losing Bond of Life, so ER percent is rather arbitrary to have on her. EM is super high value in Vape and Melt teams. Otherwise, you can ignore that stat in other types of comps. Attack percent is a great stat for her across all scenarios, as you'd expect. While Harmonic may be your number 1 set, it's hard to justify farming it when it's paired with a niche burning set that primarily works on Emily. Once again, if you're a newer player, then Harmonic's resin value increases by quite a bit. But if you're an older player, dig through all of those old double crit Gladiators pieces that you have. You're sure to find a good build to put together out of those if you've been playing for about a year or so. Once again, ER requirements are irrelevant when it comes to Father, because you only burst when you absolutely have to for survivability reasons. In order to reap her enemies effectively, Father is going to need the right weapons for the job. So, what'll her finest picks be? None other than Crimson Moon's Semblance. Not only is this one of the coolest signatures in the entire game with a really epic design, which ascends when you realize that it can turn into a scythe, it's also Arlecchino's absolute best in slot pick without question. The base attack is high, the crit rate is super welcomed, and the passive perfectly tailors itself to her Bond of Life based mechanics. Certainly her best weapon choice, not to mention the drippiest. In a Vapor Melt team with an EM Sands equipped, Staff of the Scarlet Sands is a great Arlecchino weapon choice. While you won't be stacking the passive, you still get the nifty EM-based conversion, therefore increasing the value of building EM on her, which is something that you should already be doing in her best installed teams. Huge crit rate stick too, which generally makes her far easier to build. An excellent weapon pick. Deathmatch at higher refinements with its passive buffs averaged out can actually be really competitive with Arla's other 5-star options. Even at lower refinements, it's a pretty good choice for her. Very all-rounder pick that'll get the job done swimmingly. Even if we assume that Arla isn't getting any stacks, Lumitu's Elegy stacks up to be quite the formidable option. Definitely a neat stat stick. Both Homa and Jade are basic stat stick weapons, both of which being very close to each other performance-wise. Homa's a little better, but not by some huge amount. Good all-rounder weapon choice which will work in every team that she's in. Ballad of the Fjords is neat in Vape and Melt, because the EM is rather nifty in such situations. Great for those cases. However, this weapon falls off big time if you choose to play her in any non-Vapor Melt team, since then the EM becomes kinda worthless. White Tassel is shockingly good considering that it's a 3-star pick. The passive works perfectly with Arla's kit, since normals are the main meat of her overall damage share. It offers crit rate and is very easily refinable, while also being available for completely free. Its main flaw, being a 3-star, so its base attack is quite low, but otherwise it's pretty busted for such a cheap pick, and will be your best completely free-to-play friendly bet. Missive Windspear works too if you're really trying to cope, aka if you recycled all of your white tassels on accident. It's not really insane for Arla, but it'll work if you have nothing else. She has plenty of viable weapon options. From a cheap 3-star all the way up to your legendary scythe, there's something for everyone here. If you don't have either of the free-to-play friendly weapon options, which is realistic since one can be recycled and the other one was time-gated, then you can cope on the basic craftable until you're able to get her a more synergistic option. Yet who will be joining the House of the Hearth? Well, She has multiple team archetypes because she is packed with a crud ton of effective versatility, aka plenty of really good teams that you would realistically use in a given scenario. Let's start off with her most well-known archetype, Vape. This is one of her most common team archetypes that focuses on vaporizing her insane pyro hits. It's one of the strongest Arlecchino teams out there and is the main de facto team that most people are going to be using with her. You're generally going to use Yolan here due to Bond of Life based mechanics working against our beloved Lady Farina. But if your dear Hydro Archon is C2+, it becomes worth using those two together anyway, because they'll clear so fast to the point where you won't notice any issues with the synergy. Shilunen's recent release also happened to buff this team. A very strong and reliable team archetype that'll wipe out content in no time. Example teams include Father, Yolan, Bennett, Kazuha, the Knave, Lady Farina, Bennett, Shilunen, the Hearth's King, Xingqiu, Bennett, and Sucrose work as a completely free-to-play friendly 4-star based combo. Next up, we have Forward Meltsit Lolly. This is a recent addition to the Arla team's roster, and oh boy is it a good one. It's competitive with her Vaporized teams, so if you want to save your Hydro units for the other half, then you can easily do so. She's really strong in this setup, and even if she isn't melting every single hit with the Granny's Crown application, she'll still land reactions on most hits. You can also choose to delay your normal attack so that she can melt even more hits. Fantastic new team option that'll get the job done brilliantly. Example teams include the Getter of Milk, Bennett, Sitlolly, and Shilunen, Scythe User, Broken the Broken, Granny Itzli, and Kazuha. Emily Burning is a pretty solid team. The main reason that it works is because Arla's damage is high and so is the Perfumers. They both benefit pretty nicely from Bennett's buffs too. It's as simple as that. There's no reaction reliance here, all just raw numbers. Example teams include Arla, Emily, Bennett, Kazuha. Otherwise, you can consider Mono Pyro Father. This team recently got an upgrade of Moika being introduced to the game, who can buff Father via her A4 while providing excellent sub DPS. It's another strong raw damage team that does pretty well in AoE based scenarios with her. Very solid Arla team. It can also be quite free to play friendly if you choose to use the Bennett Shangling core, considering that those two are both 4 stars. Example teams include Arlecchino, Bennett, Moika, Shilunen, Everlasting as the Moon, Exploring Kid, Shangling, Kazuha, and finally, we have Overload. This is the weakest Arla team in my opinion. However, it still gets the job done pretty nicely. It's great for shield breaking since Overload tends to be strong with that, and it's extremely teammate efficient as it doesn't ask you to use very high demand units to form the comp. You can use high demand units, but it's by no means a must. The main appeal of this team is how it frees up your Hydros or Sitlolly for other comps. Example teams include Arlecchino, Chevreuse, Fischl, Bennett, Overruled, Chevreuse, Aurodon, Moika, Reaper, Cop, Fischl, and right here, right now. There's plenty of teams that you can slot this disgruntled father into. Know that for any Shilunen or Kazuha slot that I mentioned, any generic shielder such as Zhongli will work fine if you're struggling with getting staggered constantly. This is especially relevant when up against fights such as the Copper Duo or the Tenebris Papilla. Yet how does this intimidating knave work? Well, her normal attacks on their own will deal 6 basic physical strikes. Not much else to add here. There's more to these, but we can only touch on that after discussing her skill, which would be this. She applies a red mark on enemies which will grant her Bond of Life over time. It'll upgrade into a stronger mark after 5 seconds, which is tied to your A1. It'll deal some instances of pyro damage over time while it's applied on enemies. Then, when you've let it burn on enemies after doing your support rotations, you're going to want to do a charge attack to absorb the Bond of Life that her skill generated. This is what gives you her pyro-infused normals, which are the main meat of her kit. The damage of this will be higher the more Bond of Life that you have, which is why you always want to open up by attacking enemies with Arla's skill, so that the marks have ample time to generate Bond of Life for her over the course of your rotation. Great stuff. As for her burst, she'll clear all Bond of Life that she has, and heal herself based on her current Bond of Life value and attack. It'll deal an epic-looking big pyro blast, while also clearing all skill marks around her. This'll reset her skills cooldown too. Sadly, as cool as this burst looks, it's more or less an emergency heal button more than anything else. As for her Ascension passives, simple. Her A1 is the reason as to why you always want to wait 5 seconds after casting her skill before doing her charge attack to enter her powerful pyro normals. She also gains Bond of Life when she defeats enemies with a mark. Her A4 is mostly to help out for interruption resistance, so you don't have to rely on her burst for survivability too much. Cool stuff. I usually don't care about the built-in passives, since they're usually just for exploration. However, in this case, this is where her anti-synergy with regular healers is stored, while giving her 40% pyro damage bonus in exchange for this cost. Cool. As for Father's talent priority, simple, go for this. Her normal attacks make up nearly the entirety of her damage share, so make sure to level them up first. Easily her most important ability. Her skill is capable of doing a neat bit of extra damage, so it's not a bad idea to bring it up a little bit. I would at least level her burst to 6, so that you can still get a good bit of damage in exchange for having to sacrifice her Bond of Life counter. 10-8-8 would be a pretty good talent spread in my opinion. 10-1-1 is fine if you're short on resources. Do you want to fund father's milk voyages? Then let's talk Constellations. The increased interruption res is lovely, with the additional bond of life being huge for her damage. Fantastic C1 that does a good bit for her DPS considering that it's such an early con. This prevents you from having to wait for Arlecchino skill marks to upgrade. You can simply apply them in charge attack right away. She'll also deal a quite ton of extra AoE power damage in front of her, which is really freaking neat. The additional interruption res is welcome too. +3 to your normal attack is rather busted considering how important it is to your damage share. Fantastic C3. This isn't going to be that useful to her on its own, since at this stage, you're not really using her burst or caring about it all that much unless you absolutely have to. Nice con if you have skill issue, it gets a lot better at C6. This C5 is great if you intend to get C6, but it's mid on its own if you're going to stay at C5. This makes her burst infinitely more worth using now, thanks to the absurd amount of additional scalings piled onto it. Not to mention how the crit stats of both her normal attack and burst are cranked up to the absolute max here. Insane C6. In terms of the whale meta, while C6 Moeka totally fries her, C6 Arla remains as being within the top 3 best C6s in the entire game, those being the Exalted Pyro Archon, Mualani, and of course Father herself. In terms of high Primogen based investment, I would go for her weapon first because it's so specific to your mechanics. It's paired with Absolution too, which is a good sword in my opinion, no better time to get it. Then you can aim for Constellations up to C3. I wouldn't go beyond C3 unless you wanted to go all the way to C6 because you're Arlecchino's biggest simp. Based, by the way. Arlecchino is still very versatile and powerful. No matter what way you steer it, this fact still rings true. She's one of the strongest DPSs in the game, remaining in S tier even now. She has ease of use, a fantastic design, and has some of the sickest battle animations in all of Genshin Impact. No matter how many power DPSs Hoyo throws our way, Arla will always be one of the coolest. But what do you think about Father? Does her damage hold up to this day, or is it not so great anymore in your opinion? Let me know down below, I'd love to hear your thoughts. As always, I have a ZZZ second channel. Head on over and subscribe if you're interested in some fun, silly ZZZ content. I'd also like to mention that I stream on Twitch. I stream once a week, every week on Saturdays, starting from 3 PM UK time. Come along so we can play Wuthering Waves, ZZZ, and do some other fun stuff together. Hopefully this video was able to get your father reaping her enemies' lives away. This has been Juice, signing out, and even after 5 whole patches, she's still at it, reaping her enemies.